everybody. I hope you guys had a wonderful weekend. It is Sunday night again, so I am back with another episode, a new video of Zay Historicizes. I've had a couple glasses of wine, I'm not gonna lie, so I might be a little turnt. But I just wanted to sit down today and talk about this whole TikTok situation that everybody's been, it's most definitely dominated, I think, like popular culture on social media and elsewhere, of course, this whole weekend, like the death and the resurrection of TikTok, like some biblical Jesus style stuff that just occurred this weekend with TikTok. So everyone's been talking about it. As of now, TikTok should be back online for, most of the users. That is, of course, millions of people who are using TikTok. TikTok is an app, and I did just want to preface, this is an app that I've never been on. So TikTok was founded back in 2016, and it does have about 1 billion active users currently around the world. But TikTok is an app that I just never got into, and I think a lot of it is an age thing for me. So TikTok, I really remember blowing up around the pandemic. That was, I think, maybe the first time I heard about TikTok, or maybe a couple months earlier. One thing about TikTok at that time is I just associated it with teenagers. And I think I still do till today. Most of the content creators on TikTok are between 18 and 24 years old. I'm 28, I'll be 29 in April. When the pandemic first hit, I was about 23 going on 24. And at that time, I associated TikTok with creators like Charlie D'Amelio and Addison Rae, who were teenagers. So I assumed it was an app for teenagers. I really never got into it. And 5 years later, almost 5 years later, I've never had a TikTok account. So it's really not my thing, but there's always been conversation about TikTok, its effects on young people, and obviously the ties to the Chinese government, which I'm most definitely gonna get into. But in March of 2024, the Congress actually passed a bill essentially telling TikTok that if they had not sold the company, and this was kind of a threat towards ByteDance, who is the parent company of TikTok, and they are headquartered in Beijing, that if they had not sold the company, they will be banned in the United States. And there are several countries, I know India is one of them in particular, that has actually banned TikTok. But on January 19th of 2025, which is actually today, the day that I'm filming, TikTok was set to be banned in the United States. And for several hours, because this was all of 30 minutes, guys, for several hours, realistically, people did not have access to TikTok. But now TikTok has resurrected, and we have one man to thank for that. That is the man who will be inaugurated tomorrow as our next president for his second term in office, as the next president of the United States on the day of MLK at that. So I did want to mention the message that TikTok posted to its millions of users in the United States, around 150 million actually. So here it goes. Welcome back. Thanks for your patience and support. As a result of President Trump's efforts, TikTok is back in the US. You can continue to create, share, and discover all the things you love on TikTok. So again, TikTok is back. Welcome back. They are now operating in the United States again. Shout out to all the millions of people who were mourning TikTok, and now TikTok has resurrected, so you guys have your TikTok back. But this message and the specific thanks towards Donald J. Trump by the CEO of TikTok, who is fully in bed with that administration, are so hilarious to me, because it is stunt queen stuff before this man is back in office. He is being inaugurated tomorrow. By the time you guys see this video several days ago, it'll be several days since his inauguration. But it's just, it's so funny to me. But I did want to get into some of my opinions concerning TikTok, the reason it was banned, a lot of the fears surrounding TikTok that exist, and of course historicize some of the fears that surround TikTok. Because of course this is a channel for historicization, so I can't just, kiki all the time. But yeah, I did want to just start off and preface with that. So again, TikTok, she died and she has resurrected. So, through the biblical story, the biblical arc of TikTok has been restored before the week. before the week even started. Yeah, that is where we are now when it comes to the app of TikTok. Shout out to TikTok users, you have her back. I did want to get into some of the reasons why TikTok, there was actually, obviously just a plan to ban TikTok in the United States in the first place. Because of course this is a channel where we historicize, and we typically historicize into the Gilded Age and the Progressive Era. I did want to definitely look into a lot of the anti-Chinese sentiments that I've noticed that comes into the hatred, or definitely the fear of TikTok that we have in this country. Back in 2023, I know that Wyoming had actually moved forward with banning TikTok like in that state, and a federal judge had initially struck it down because they felt that it hinged on the freedoms of Americans, to access information and, apps through the internet, of course, as TikTok is once again being used by over 150 million Americans. And I'm definitely going to go into those stats. However, anti-Chinese sentiments are a very, very big reason why a lot of people actually fear TikTok in the first place. So there's a tweet by Ben Shapiro, who, and he tweeted this 2 days ago, and I'm just gonna go ahead and read it. So in this tweet, he says that the CCP is our enemy. TikTok is a Chinese op. It is designed to manipulate Westerners into parroting CCP propaganda while gathering all their data. If TikTok divests itself of Chinese ownership, it should continue to operate. If not, it should not. So Ben Shapiro actually doesn't necessarily mention specifically here that he actually wants TikTok to be banned in the United States. He's essentially saying that it should not operate at all if it does not operate under some sort of Western ownership. As long as it's owned by the Chinese, essentially, then it is not something that should be available to Americans or really anybody at all. And of course, that is the fear of essentially the Chinese manipulating and intervening in the affairs of the West and Western citizens, because of course the biggest fear of the West is other cultures doing to them what they have done for centuries to other cultures. It is very interesting. I did want to mention that Nick Fuentes, and I'm just going to go ahead and say that Ben Shapiro and Nick Fuentes are two sides of the same coin to me. They're both awful people, but Nick Fuentes does mention here, he tweets response to Ben Shapiro saying that you're an Israelite op designed to manipulate white people into parroting Zionist propaganda. So I do want to mention that Nick Fuentes here is kind of flipping the script on Ben Shapiro and using his own logic against him, where he's once again Nick Fuentes, who's a literal Nazi, he's properly an anti-Semite, is using some of that logic to come at Ben Shapiro in this particular case, where Ben Shapiro is signaling and honing in on the Chinese. Nick is responding to him and honing in on the Jews in this case. Again, two sides of the same coin, both awful people. I just found it very interesting that Nick had responded to Ben Shapiro in that way. But again, the anti-Chinese sentiment is very, very strong with TikTok. And it is worth noting that the man now being credited with saving TikTok is actually one of the individuals who had parroted and really pushed, who he had actually really pushed for the banning of TikTok several years ago. As far back as 2020, Donald Trump was actively reaching out to make sure that TikTok could be banned right at the tail end of his very first term in the United States. And a lot of that does come out of, once again, anti-Chinese sentiments that are being felt around the country. So as of right now, there are over 4 million people in the United States who are of Chinese descent. So as of in 2023, 5% of foreign-born US residents are Chinese. And it is also worth noting that in 2023, about 24,000 Chinese crossed via the US-Mexico border. So you do have this sort of growing number of illegal immigration with a lot of Chinese migrants who are crossing over from Mexico, which is something that I wasn't even fully aware of. And right on the heels of that, you do have a lot of these anti-Chinese sentiments that are coming up. The moment that Trump was actually first elected back in 2016, we do see that he essentially waged a trade war on China. So you had where he was charging about 45% of tariff on Chinese exports to the United States. And this, right at the tail end of Trump's presidency, you also had the coronavirus happen, which is ironically the time where TikTok absolutely blew up. And in March of 2020, he did refer to coronavirus as the Chinese virus, which is something that a lot of people were saying not to do because this was the era where we were getting into hashtag Stop Asian Hate. So Trump's trade war with China and his referring to coronavirus is the Chinese virus definitely drums up some of these like anti-Chinese sentiments that we are seeing. And we also see this under the Joe Biden presidency as well. Joe Biden's framing of like US versus China as democracy versus authoritarianism is definitely something that also pushes a lot of those anti-Chinese sentiments, because if you have a lot of radicalization in the United States where we're viewing everything as US versus China, a lot of people are going to racialize those sentiments. So it is something that we see most definitely under Trump, but I also want to mention that we see that under Joe Biden as well. And this is something that, of course, a lot of people are falling for when it comes to these anti-Chinese sentiments. Hashtag Stop Asian Hate was something that got really, really popular during the pandemic and even into 2021, because you had a 339% increase in hate crimes against Asian people from 2021 to 2022. And I think as a nation, we were having a lot of these conversations about the treatment of not only the Chinese, but a lot of Asian immigrants as well, all around fears surrounding the coronavirus. And I did want to just throw in some statistics here. So in March of 2021, 55% of Americans actually supported an imposition of limits on a number of Chinese students allowed to study in the country. And these are all like Pew Research numbers and studies. In January of 2022, 35% of Americans saw China as an enemy. And like I did mention, Joe Biden's framing of China versus the United States definitely feeds into that, as he would have been president at that time. In March of 2022, 82% of Americans had unfavorable views of China. And again, this is all from the Pew Research Center. So just in the last couple of years, we are seeing this uptick in a lot of anti-Chinese sentiment. And Ben Shapiro's tweet saying that, this is a CCP app, this is a Chinese app designed to influence Westerners. He's most definitely drumming up those concerns, especially on the heels of the TikTok ban, because a lot of people were like, this is BS, this is very controversial. But Ben Shapiro's trying to say, actually, this is a Chinese app and it's meant to influence you guys. Don't fall for it. In 2023, and this is something that I discovered over the course of my research, which is actually really crazy. So Senate Bill 264 was released, and this made it so that you can criminally charge Chinese citizens without green cards, and they can actually go to jail for purchasing property. So this was a Florida law that was introduced to ban Chinese nationals from owning property in the state. And of course, Governor Ron DeSantis, who is also a problem, signed this as well. So this is in 2023. So over the course of several years, we are seeing this rise in like anti-Chinese sentiment, and it's building up to this fear that we have of TikTok. And it's not a surprise at all that, the conversations around TikTok, to ban TikTok, its influence on Westerners, its influence on Americans, and all those things. Right while you're having those conversations to ban TikTok, you're also seeing this growth in anti-Chinese sentiments around the country. So that's something that we most definitely cannot ignore. I mean, it's pretty messy, but it most definitely gets us to where we are right now. And just the sentiments that we have towards TikTok and China as a whole, as a country. So because this is, of course, Zay Historicizes, and I have to historicize on this channel, because if not, then what the heck am I actually doing with my life? I did really want to historicize a lot of anti-Chinese sentiments in this country, because again, I think a lot of that plays into the fears that we have towards TikTok. But again, it is nothing new in this nation. So over the course of my research, I was able to see that the very first Chinese immigrants arrived here as far back as the late 18th century, the late 1700s, but Chinese immigration doesn't really pick up until you get into the mid 19th century. And a lot of that is because of the decline of the Qing dynasty and a lot of the poverty being suffered back in China by a lot of Chinese, Chinese laborers. So a lot of them are coming to the United States. And this happens to coincide with the gold rush, of course. The gold rush, which is simultaneously this time where a lot of Americans are getting rich and they're hitting it big, but it also coincides with a lot of the most horrible atrocities that have happened in the United States. We have to, of course, remember that this was in California. You have the California genocide, which is being, enacted upon the indigenous people in that state. But you also have a lot of Chinese migrants that are coming, and they are trying to strike gold, of course. They're working they're working on things like railroads. They're just trying to, of course, establish themselves. And these migrants are usually men, if not like exclusively men. And we see that in this era, you do have a rise of a lot of anti-Chinese sentiment, because of course, a lot of these Chinese men are competing directly with a lot of white men when it comes to like, searching for gold, harvesting gold, and like just in the mines. I'm not 100% sure about those intricacies, but once again, they are definitely competing for wealth with a lot of white American men, which obviously is a huge problem. So in this time, you do see the rise of the minstrel show character, John Chinaman. And I did want to mention that John Chinaman is he's a minstrel character who arises in the 1850s, and he is characterized as effeminate, unmanly, and his poor pursuit of white women. So he is a man who is essentially, he just lacks masculinity and he can't land a woman. Over the course of my research, I did learn that a lot of Chinese men in Louisiana, and this is crazy because I did not know this, a lot of Chinese men in Louisiana were actually, because they were arriving here by themselves, they actually married interracially often. So about over half of Chinese men in Louisiana who were married to black women, and nearly half of them, around 40-something%, the other half essentially, were married to white women. So it is very interesting that at this exact same time in the late 19th century, you have this idea of Chinese men of being like super effeminate and not being able to like land a woman at all. But you do also have the pervading stereotype of like coolies, and the coolies it's a term that is leveraged mainly against poor Chinese and also Indian migrants, but mainly the Chinese in the United States at this time. Coolies become scapegoats. It is essentially a way for the United States to be like, those who are on top, the big men, to be like, the reason that there are a lot of poor wages, the reason that you guys are struggling is because of these Chinese immigrants. So at this particular time, they aren't like considered model minorities. They're actually considered people who are making it very, very difficult for white Americans to establish themselves. I do want to compare the way that coolies were represented in the late 19th century. There is most definitely that connection with the way that I think a lot of Americans today, and a huge part of Trump's base, actually view poor Latin Americans coming out of places like Mexico and Guatemala and, El Salvador in particular. So with this idea of the coolie and this person who is making it difficult for you as a white American to establish yourself, it is not a surprise at all that not only are coolies scapegoats, they become the points of violence in a lot of really, really horrible ways. And over the course of my research, I was able to see the ways in which a lot of the Chinese were targeted for so much violence in the mid-19th century. In 1871, you have the LA Chinese massacre, in which 19 are killed, 15 men are actually hanged by an angry mob of Americans. So that is, this is an awful thing that occurred. And again, nobody's brought to justice about the violence committed against this man. You have the San Francisco riot in 1877. You have the Rock Springs massacre in Wyoming in 1885. This is something that I also just learned of, during my research today. And these are all acts of violence that are being committed against Chinese men who are just coming here to, try to support themselves after leaving China, very desolate. And again, nobody's actually brought to justice. When it comes to the Rock Springs massacre, I do believe that there were about 3 or 4 men who they did actually stand trial, but of course they were acquitted by an all-white jury. And I do want to also mention that around the same time, you do have a lot of, different acts and laws being passed to make sure that the Chinese do not have access to citizenship in this country. So it makes sense that while you have this rise of violence against a lot of Chinese immigrants, at the exact same time, they're also passing laws, just really, really petty laws. Things like you can't testify, a Chinese person cannot testify in a jury against a white person. Obviously, this violence being committed against them by a lot of these white men, it's really putting them into a very helpless spot. And in my several videos ago, and I'm pretty sure I did in the last video I did as well, I do mention the Chinese Exclusion Act, which occurs in 1882. That is a ban on Chinese migrants from coming into the United States that Congress passes and ratifies. It is a ban on Chinese migration, and we do see again these limits to access that the Chinese have for bettering themselves, and even rights to citizenship in the United States. It is worth noting that the Naturalization Act of 1870, it extends citizenship, at least on paper, to Black Americans, but it specifically excludes Asians. In 1896, you have the Plessy versus Ferguson case, and that was the case that established segregation, separate but equal, as a legal doctrine in the United States. That is 26 years after the Naturalization Act in 1870, and about 14 years after the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882. And I wanted to read what one of the presiding judges on the Plessy versus Ferguson case, who was John Marshall Harlan, had wrote about Chinese people. So he does write in the Plessy versus Ferguson decision that of Chinese people, a race so different from our own that we do not permit those belonging to it to become citizens of the United States. Persons belonging to it are, with few exceptions, absolutely excluded from our country. I allude to the Chinese race. So here we're seeing that what Harlan is essentially saying is, you have Plessy versus Ferguson, you have the separation of white people and Black people in the United States, but he's essentially really saying that the Chinese are to be completely excluded. They do not have rights to citizenship. They have no place in the United States, is really what he's saying. On the backs of a lot of the, obviously on the back of a lot of the violence that's already being committed against the Chinese in this country, to make sure that they have a very, very difficult time of really establishing themselves in the United States. So this is something that is very, very important. I never actually read that quote before. I didn't even realize that the Chinese had come up in the Plessy versus Ferguson decision, but it does, of course, make sense in a lot of ways. So again, that's 1896. I always talk about the Gilded Age and the Progressive Era here because I feel like we're still living in that era in so many ways. Like the Gilded Age speaks so much. There are just so many parallels. It's just crazy. I keep talking about the Gilded Age and the Progressive Eras because that's how dumb we are, guys. We still think like this. So with the recent Senate bill in Florida, like hashtag Stop Asian Hate, a lot of the anti-Chinese sentiment, I definitely wanted to allude to the fact that anti-Chinese sentiment is something that is very, 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 very old in this country, honey. Okay, it's something that has been going on for a very, very, very long time, and us seeing the rise in a lot of these anti-Chinese sentiment, while we're also seeing a rise in a lot of Chinese immigrants coming to this country, those definitely make sense. It's that pattern. It is the disease of this nation. Racism being, of course, one of the biggest diseases, mental illnesses that this nation has always suffered with. But again, I definitely wanted to allude to the fact that a lot of the sentiment that even went into banning TikTok most definitely comes out of anti-Chinese sentiment. And the federal judge that had actually blocked the proposal from Wyoming to ban TikTok in Wyoming, they had actually mentioned that there was a strong anti-Chinese sentiment in the proposal to ban TikTok in Wyoming in the first place. But why TikTok? Well, that is because TikTok is a really big freaking deal. TikTok was founded in 2016, and it is again owned by ByteDance, which is the parent company to TikTok. And TikTok has grown more in the last, 2016 is almost 10 years ago now, which is crazy to say. It's grown more in the last 8 years than any other social media app. So TikTok currently has 1 billion monthly active users. It has been downloaded 3 billion times since 2016. Absolutely bonkers. And ByteDance has a $200 billion value. It is I believe the biggest startup in the world. So majority of the content creators on TikTok are between ages 18 and 22, which is very important to note. I did mention earlier that I always felt like TikTok was a app for young people. I am 28 years old. I know I talk like I'm 60. Sometimes I'm 28, but I just usually associate TikTok with teenagers, but most of the content creators are between 18 and 24. And overall, people in the United States spend an average of 90 minutes a day on TikTok. Kids spend an average of 113 minutes a day on TikTok, which is almost 2 hours. That is a lot of time that children are spending on TikTok, teenagers in particular. So TikTok has a very, very huge influence. TikTok is an app that we all hear about. I'm not on TikTok, but I see TikTok reels all the time because they're on Instagram. I associate TikTok with just doom scrolling. I have a lot of negative opinions of TikTok, and I think the way that TikTok moved this weekend most definitely it's most definitely clouded my judgment on TikTok even more, and why I think that it's pretty problematic in a lot of ways. But we all hear about TikTok. We've all seen the memes. We've all seen the reels. We've all seen the dances. It's a very, very, very popular act. So it does make a lot of sense that there are a lot of fears concerning the influence that the TikTok app has on Americans. I was actually reading a New York Times article before I really started doing my research into this, and it's titled "What We Know About TikTok Ban," and it's from New York Times, and the writer, her name is Sapna Maheshwari. I did want to, just give a shout out to her, because I really, really loved the article. She does mention something very, very important, and I'm going to read part of it, where she is looking into the way that TikTok has kind of made Trump a savior in this entire situation, which obviously I'm not buying it, not even on sale, baby. This could be on clearance, and I'm still not buying her. But she did want to mention that, but she does have a section in the article where she says, "Didn't Trump start all of this in the first place?" So she writes, "Yes, Mr. Trump tried to orchestrate a sale of TikTok to American companies in 2020 and attempted to ban the app, an effort that was ultimately struck down by federal courts. He publicly changed his stance on TikTok last March, soon after he met with Jeff Yas," I don't know, I feel like saying his name like that, "a billionaire and Republican mega donor who owns a significant share of ByteDance, though Mr. Trump has said they did not discuss the company." So shocker, shocker, there's a billionaire involved, so Trump has changed his stance. So the moment I read this, I really wasn't that surprised. Jeff Yas, who is a billionaire who owns a significant portion of ByteDance, has a net worth of around $50 billion. It's not a surprise at all that in March of 2024, he and Trump met, and then from there, Trump became a fan of TikTok. So that March bill, which would have been, again, March, when he would have met with Jeff, which was trying to force TikTok to be sold to an American company because of fears of national security or whatever, right around that exact same time. It's just really, really funny to me that, and of course, not surprising at all that Trump would change his stance on TikTok now that one of his billionaire buddies essentially is, obviously involved. This is a man who owns a very significant portion of ByteDance, the parent company of TikTok. Back in 2020, when Trump was very, very anti-TikTok, he did feel as if there was a lot of just anti-Trump propaganda on TikTok. However, Trump did recently mention that he actually feels that TikTok was very, very helpful. Surprisingly, after he met up with his friend Jeff, was actually very, very helpful with, his term. It was very, very helpful with actually reelecting him back into office. So he has completely changed his stance on TikTok. And I do want to mention that the CEO of TikTok, who is not Chinese, he's from Singapore. Every single time I think of the CEO of TikTok, I'm just imagining thinking of that congressional hearing where he's explaining to that less than smart congressman that he's not from China, he's from Singapore.
Have you ever been a member of the Chinese Communist Party?
Senator, I'm Singaporean. No.
Have you ever been associated or affiliated with the Chinese Communist Party?
But anyway, his name is Xiao Zichu. I'm not sure if I pronounced that right, but he is the CEO of TikTok. He's another billionaire that Trump is clearly buddies with. I feel like I have a lot of opinions about this whole weekend and what happened, but it kind of makes sense. It really just feels it all really makes sense when you consider the meeting with Jeff Yas, of course, and then, you know, Xiao Zichu, and of course his stance on Trump. They will all be here for his inauguration tomorrow. So, you know, that's not surprising at all. I also did want to mention, of course, that I do look at TikTok. There are a lot of negative opinions that I have on TikTok. I'm not somebody who like cared to have TikTok banned, but a lot of my negative opinion on TikTok is how I feel as if TikTok has most definitely conditioned and radicalized a lot of young men to the far right, especially when it comes to the manosphere with content creators like Andrew Tate and Sneeko. That's a big reason why I was never on TikTok. Not that I'll ever fall for something like that, but I just have a lot of negative opinions towards TikTok. Like, I'm genuinely not a fan of TikTok and I was never on it, but the way that they have moved this weekend and these, like, you know, praise our supreme Donald Trump messages that TikTok has been pushing out, and, you know, Xiao Zichu and his relationship, Jeff Yas and all their relationship, and how they're kind of all there with Donald Trump has only made my opinion of TikTok even worse, and it's why I will stand 2 toes down and like never ever supporting that app. However, it does make a lot of sense, and I am most definitely interested and how this is going to play moving forward into 2025. TikTok is going to be a very big priority, and I do see, you know, they will be likely relinquishing a lot of the ownership from ByteDance, but I think that when it comes down to it, Jeff Yass will definitely be covered. And I'm also most definitely interested in how Elon Musk, you know, of course, him owning Twitter, and then of course even Mark Zuckerberg, because Mark Zuckerberg courted a lot of controversy just recently with a lot of the anti-queer, anti-LGBTQ policies that Meta had pushed out. So in a weird way, I feel like all of it, it just feels like they all feel involved, babes. Like something is definitely going on here, and I feel like at the end of the day, these are the billionaire buddies, and Trump's going to look out for them. And I most definitely feel as if they're all definitely going to get a piece of the cake. That's all I'm going to say. But I'm really, really not surprised. I've just been watching the way that they've been moving with TikTok, and I'm just like, it feels like I said, I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it, baby. I hope you guys enjoy TikTok. I just definitely wanted to, you know, for this video, I had to historicize, so I definitely wanted to look at the anti-Chinese sentiments that are surrounding TikTok and the, you know, anti-Chinese sentiments that I feel like have been growing in this country in the most recent years. But at the exact same time, my own opinions, you know, this is definitely opinion heavy, because maybe because I've had a couple glasses of wine and I wanted to talk, you know, I'm a little turnt, but I definitely wanted to like input, you know, some of my own opinions towards this whole situation. It just feels like it's Trump queen, Trump stuff, honestly. At this point, where are we even surprised? You know, like we saw this going down, and at the end of the day, this is something that dominated popular culture and conversation this entire weekend. A lot of TikTok content creators were really, really afraid, but I mean, for the most part, they should be good. You know, it's back, but I think a lot of people, I think this has most definitely turned a lot of people off to TikTok, at least from what I've just been looking and scrolling through Twitter. A lot of people have been turned off from TikTok from this whole situation. And I will say I'm one of those people, but I was never there. So, I mean, I was never turned on to TikTok. So there we go. Anyway, yeah, I just wanted to, have that conversation. Hopefully, again, you guys all had a wonderful weekend. It is Sunday night, as I'm always filming, and I hope you guys have a really, really great week. Tomorrow is MLK Day, and I'm working. Can you believe it? I'm working, and it is also the inauguration of Donald Trump. So this week, I'm sure it's gonna be busy. It's gonna be hectic. It's gonna be crazy. There's a lot that's going on, but I hope you guys just, you know, you continue to stay blessed and remain, you know, sane, and just have a wonderful week. I just wish you guys a blessed and wonderful week. Thank you guys so much as always for watching. So yeah, enjoy your day and good night.